I want to start with a personal statement of my own belief, and that is to say that there's no higher calling for me than the promotion of justice. This is a personal statement on my behalf, and it's one that has, in fact, not just impelled my professional career, but also this doctoral research. Judicial reform, promoting justice, the sort of challenges that I face are schoolgirls on their way to school, on crowded buses in the city of Port Moresby being raped on their way to school, and everyone in the bus being too frightened to do anything to stop that because the police are part of the problem and the courts don't work. Other examples of the sort of challenge that I'm working on are the courts in Pakistan where land disputes are more than 60 years old. The grandchildren of the disputants are still fighting over what was originally a neighbourhood dispute. I work in places like Cambodia where land is routinely stolen by the rich and the powerful, and they then use the courts to legalise that theft. So there are many profound challenges of justice in our world, and the starting point for me in this thesis is that judicial reform doesn't work very well in addressing those challenges. So my first principal argument is that there is a prevailing theory of judicial reform, and this theory is based on an economic instrumental justification. We do judicial reform to promote economic growth. This is a theory that I will establish and demonstrate, and I will then refute it. I will then demonstrate that this theory is insufficient. In order to redress this insufficiency, I then argue that there's a need to elevate a new dimension to the theory, and that is what I'm calling a constitutive humanistic dimension, the effect of which is to reframe the reform endeavour to focus on promoting justice as equity and fairness. This is a new endeavour. It's an endeavour that's continuing to grow and learn, and in this sense it's quite dynamic and in its nature very evolutionary, and that's documented in the literature. Secondly, while there are a number of explanations for why we do this stuff, the economic justification is the oldest, and it continues to have primacy. So while there are other reasons why we want to improve justice, the main one, ladies and gentlemen, surprisingly enough, has got nothing to do with justice. It has to do with economic growth, building the engine of the economy, because it is argued by economists usually that this is the best way of alleviating poverty. My argument is there's a gap, there's no compelling robust theory or evidence of success, and this gap creates the space and also the imperative to strengthen the theory, to go back to the theory because it is insufficient, and to seek to redress that theory by, as I've said, elevating this equitable and distributional dimension to justice. So in two words, the theory will be constitutive. We promote justice because it has merit in itself, not just because it has an instrumental value in doing something else like helping the economy. We can't make judgments about deficiency in performance until we have a robust way of making those judgments. But that's actually what's happening. There are these critical judgments being exercised that performance is disappointing, but they are based on a spurious means of evaluation. And I established a spurious means of evaluation, first of all by demonstrating that there's no orthodox way of evaluating development. And secondly, even when the evaluation is conducted, a meta-evaluation or an evaluation of the evaluation finds that either it's rarely done or it's done in a technically dubious way. I'm bringing a lot of practical experience. How can that not be relevant in a trade-off between insight and neutrality? That is a trade-off that needs to be made. Do you only bring in people that know nothing about a subject to evaluate it? This is the challenge. The constructivist challenge to positivism. They say This fetish with scientific neutrality is, one, irrelevant, and two, not helpful. This is a deeply embedded scholarly argument, and it's all about the participation discourse, and that is that what's important is not that you're neutral or not neutral, because that, if you're neutral, it may just guarantee you're ignorant. That what's important is that you're critically reflective. What's important is that you disclose your baggage and you're very explicit about what your values are. In the case study in Papua New Guinea, there is now evidence that it is possible to demonstrate success in judicial reform, despite all of the uncertainties that I've identified in the earlier slide. That is, if donors are prepared to spend the money, there is a systematic way of monitoring judicial reform so that you can demonstrate change. In order to answer the questions that cause me to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning too often in ungodly places, I had to visit each of those chapters. I was stunned. I didn't want to go back to philosophy. I got away with that reading Aristotle. Who needs Aristotle? And yet the rule of law and how we conceptualize and justify and constitutionalism and so on, that's where I had to go. And it took me a long time to realise that judicial reform had been hijacked by development economics. I mean, for me that is very radical, that what we do has been hijacked by another discipline. And the reason for it is that the money comes out of banks. The big money comes out of the World Bank. The bank's number one mandate is to lend money. I wanted to explain for myself the theory. I share this conviction. Judicial reform is important. It's in my blood. Most of you people think it's uncontroversial. But what does that really mean? So I had to go back to classical Enlightenment and modern philosophy. It was for me a fascinating journey that I won't be able to talk about in any depth today, but it goes right back to Aristotle and notions of the sovereignty of law, which is a very significant concept, which is embedded at the very beginnings of Western concepts of civilization. But significantly, Aristotle, when he defined law and looked at the role of the state in administering law, equity was always incredibly important. And equity was the rectification of the defects of law. It's all about fairness, it's all about distribution. When the law doesn't get it right, we go to equity. I mean, my argument is that we measure justice through the application of rights. Those rights aren't abstract, airy-fairy things. They're embedded in covenants and treaties that have been endorsed by specific countries. And these are universally endorsed, whatever that means. What it means is that at the level of each country, those rights need to be localised. I can't believe it. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. And if there aren't any questions and challenges, I'll be stunned.